Week 8, classroom pizza, flour, let's go. It's time for class. Welcome to episode 8 of Classroom Pizza. Over the last 6 weeks, painstaking weeks, we have gone one ingredient at a time and looked at its effect on the overall pizza dough. Today is our last ingredient. We are down to flour. That's right, we saved the probably most debated topic for last. So let's get into it. Flour is probably the most argued about ingredient in pizza dough. You're going to hear chefs tell you it's the most important element. You're going to hear chefs tell you as long as you've got techniques down, it doesn't matter what flour you use. But today, we're going to try to get a better understanding about why these chefs are arguing it all. We're going to talk about the factors of flour that go into creating our final pizza dough product. First, there really is no right answer. As we've said on every episode and blog and podcast of Classroom Pizza, the only thing that matters is you. Cheesy, I know, but that's the truth. Really, the only important thing is that you come up with a final pizza dough recipe or pizza sauce recipe that you enjoy and that you're proud to make. You've also got to consider the style of pizza you're going to be making. A New York style, a deep dish Chicago, Detroit style. All of these are going to have different structures, qualities about the dough. So to keep things simple and concise, let's assume we're going to be making a Neapolitan pizza. There are a number of flours out there to use for pizza dough. We could use all-purpose flours, we could do bread flours, 00 flours, which we'll talk about today. We could also change the ratios. We could do partial bread flour to partial all-purpose flour. We could add semolina flour. There are tons of options and tons of ways to combine them. So how do you know what works? We're going to talk about 4 factors that we're going to consider when talking about these different flours. 1, the protein content of that flour. 2, the ability of that flour to absorb water. 3, whether or not you're cooking it in a high temperature or low temperature. And when I say high, I mean 900 degrees as opposed to our home ovens at 500 degrees. And the 4th one is what's called the W factor. First up is probably the one you hear about the most, the protein content of a flour. Now, when flour is eventually ground down from wheat, there are 2 proteins remaining that we care about, gluten and gliadin. Okay, there's an easy way to remember that. It doesn't matter. Don't remember it. Who cares? The important thing is that when those 2 proteins get wet from the water that we add to our flour and then they get hand mixed around in the kneading process, we are forming gluten. This protein content is directly related to the gluten development of your dough. Gluten structure provides extensibility, the ability of us to stretch the dough, and elasticity, which is that snapback. So the more gluten development we have, the more gluten structure that we've got, we can spread the dough paper thin to get that nice window pane effect where you can see through but the dough isn't torn. The next crucial factor is the absorption rate of the flour. In other words, how well does that flour absorb water? Remember, the hydration level is crucial in a pizza dough because when we throw that pizza into the oven, all of that water turns to steam. That steam is leaving spaces in the dough, which leads to a nice, light, airy dough, which is crucial for, you guessed it, Neapolitan pizza. Temperature is also crucial in making the decision about what flour to go with. If you were an at-home baker, you might not be able to use certain flours that Neapolitan chefs can use because their ovens go up to 900 degrees. However, I will mention that with the rise of companies like Uni or Gozni, these at-home high-heat ovens are blowing up and you can get them for under $500 to have at home and go up to 900 degrees to make awesome Neapolitan-style pizzas. The last factor is a very technical factor, and it's actually kind of a measure of the other things we've talked about a little bit already. The last one is a very technical factor, and it's actually kind of a combination of some of the other things we've talked about. This is what's called the W factor. So when you have a flour, The W factor is basically how strong that flour is. So they take this machine, it's called an alveograph, you don't need to know that for the test, and they take a standard amount of the flour that they've milled and they basically blow it up in this machine, and they see how much they can blow it up without the dough bursting. This is measuring the strength of the flour. The W factor is crucial because for a hard fast rule, again, not exactly how the whole picture looks, but a hard fast rule is that the more protein we have, the higher the W factor. Now, why is this important? Doughs that have a higher W factor are better for longer fermentation times. This is important because the yeast is going to have more time to release those byproducts, which is going to give your dough better flavor. One such flour that's good for this is the Caputo brand of 00 flour. I want to squash a potential misunderstanding about 00 flour. 00 simply means that it was milled at the finest possible setting that it could be. So if you took a handful of all-purpose flour and a handful of 00 flour, you'd notice that the 00 flour is much more finely milled as compared to the all-purpose flour. This just helps with a better structure of the dough and better hydrating the dough. As with any style of flour, all-purpose, bread flour, you're going to have tons of brands. Caputo is just one. You've got King Arthur. You've got tons out there. 00, though, refers to just how finely milled it is. But you've still got to take into consideration what is the protein level, because that affects the W factor. So all of these elements work together to determine, is this flour right for my dough, my oven temperature, and what I'm going for. Overwhelmed yet? I don't blame you. But let's try to keep it simple. Scenario 1, you're cooking at home, you've got a short 6 to 8 hour window, go with all-purpose flour. Keep it simple. If you want to mix it up and get some more protein content in there, you can try adding 25% bread flour to your 75% all-purpose flour. Scenario 2, you want a longer fermentation time. We're talking 48 hours or 72 hours. I would recommend a higher protein 00 flour to get that better gluten development, dough structure, and that water absorption quality of the 00 flours. I've mentioned the Caputo brand. They have temperature ranges for home ovens, 500 degrees, up to the at-home high heat, like an Uni Pro or an Uni Coda. Those are at-home pizza ovens that get up to 900 degrees, so they have flours for those as well. So Caputo is a great brand, but any 00 flour will have that finely ground flour with the appropriate protein content. Whichever scenario suits you better, it never hurts to try for yourself. So, your homework this week is to make 2 doughs. One of the doughs will use only all-purpose flour, and the other dough will use only Tipo 00 flour. Then, wherever you watched, come on back and leave a comment letting me know how it went. That's going to do it for our ingredient deep dive of our dough. Now that you've got some very basic knowledge down, you can start to change the baker's percentages, you can add other ingredients, you can remove ingredients, you can change the type of yeast, change the type of flour. You've got tons of things to start trying, and as we continue with Classroom Pizza, we're going to add new tips, new skills, new tricks that you can use. Next week, we are beginning with our March Recipe Madness. We are going to go 5 episodes, 5 weeks, 5 brand new ingredients, homemade dough, homemade sauce, and 5 new recipes for you to wow your friends and family. Thank you for joining me. I will see you next week for another episode of Classroom Pizza.